Welcome to the first episode of the Untitled SEO podcast by YesEO. Now, for this episode, I interviewed a really interesting person I know called Norman. And this podcast didn't quite go in the direction I thought it would. I'm not going to say much more than that. I'll tell you what, I'm just going to shut my yap and let you listen. Hello, Norman. Thank you for joining me today. Now, the reason I wanted to speak to you on this podcast is that in my world, the world of SEO, which is search engine optimization, which I'll explain in just a moment, there's a lot of people worried about AI, artificial intelligence. So I'd like your perspective, and I'll explain why in just a moment. So first of all, search engine optimization is a matter of making sure people get found when Google is representing them. So that's a funny way of putting it. If you sit down and search for theatre tickets or something, for example, it's my job with SEO to make sure my clients get found first. Now, Google figures that out by looking at the quality of your website and trying to judge how authoritative you are. So, some chap operating from a back bedroom with a theatre he's made out of a cardboard box is going to struggle to sell tickets compared to the London Palladium, for example. So a lot of what Google does is try and assess how much authority you have. So one of the ways that we work is by creating really good content and helping our clients make it as clear as possible to Google that they are very authoritative. Now, one of the ways that that's happening at the moment is people are using artificial intelligence, AI, to create lots of articles and lots of web pages to try and inflate their importance. And there's a lot of argument at the moment of people saying, well, this is no good. Machines are taking place of the human. They are taking away the creativity. They're taking away the opportunity to express yourself. And some people think it's dishonest to use AI. So the reason I wanted to speak to you is that I know that in the 1950s you started working at Boeing in Seattle.
Yes.
And part of your role at Boeing was to bring computer-assisted design into Boeing.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so first of all, could you just tell us a little bit about how that came about, how you ended up in Seattle?
Yes, righto. It was a long time ago. Forgive me if I stumble a bit. But, okay, what was I doing over in Seattle? I have to take a step back here. I'm awfully sorry. You can always cut it out. But when I arrived at Cambridge, okay, I made the discovery that someone or other, his name later, had built a computer. Now, I already knew what a computer was because before the war, I had heard on the radio, in those days, there was always a play on Saturday night called Saturday Night Theatre. And I used to listen to it, and my father, we used to sit there and we used to chat about it and so forth. So this was at the end of the end of 1939, and the name of the if I can go into a slight detail here, the name of the play. It was written by a Czechoslovak who has a funny name, and I recognise it when I see it, but I don't have it in front of me right now.
Asimov?
I don't think so.
Okay,
it's something like that.
Okay.
Anyway, and the title of the play was R.U.R. R.U.R. Not A-R-E-Y-O-U, but the letter R-U. Rossum's Universal Robots.
Uh-huh.
That's where the word robot came from. And this was 1939. And the whole idea about it was that robots, which became computers, were going to take over. And so I said to my father, well, how we've got to do something to stop this. What are we going to do? And he said, just pull the plugs out. And I thought, my father was brighter than I realised. All you've got to do is go around and pull the plugs out of all the robots. And so I was, at a very early age, waiting for computers to happen. And I didn't know that anything had happened until 1953. But then I discovered that there was indeed a computer, and I think you're probably sitting on it right there. But I'll find it later on. And it was made by the professor of, there was a sort of professor of computing at Cambridge, even though it wasn't a subject, and no one around knew what it was all about. But I did, you see, and I started telling everybody, okay, not knowing anything really, the robots, computers are the thing of the future. But those who were taking medicine wanted to stick to medicine, became doctors, and have now retired. And it was the same with engineers, one sort and another. So it was a very lonely life, knowing anything about or being confronted with anything about computers in that time. By which time, now I've forgotten what the question was. Oh, how did I get to Seattle?
Yeah.
Yes. And so when I finished at Cambridge, they wanted me to carry on and do a PhD. I said no. I've got to work. I've got to do things. I'm fed up with studying, and but I discovered. So I sort of stood up and said, "Tell me where your computers are," because I'd been now. My profession then was computer programmer and had been ever since. And I wanted, I needed to find a company that had computers, and there weren't any. But there was one, not a company, but an organisation in Canada, in Vancouver. It was the University of British Columbia. British Columbia is the most westerly part of Canada, as I'm sure you know. And so I wrote to them and I said, I hear you've got a computer. I know all about computers. Not that I'm a hardware man. I'm only a software. I know how to program them, but not how. And I understand the design of them, but I couldn't translate that into hardware. So if you've got a computer and it has a language of some sort, then I'd like to come and work for you. So they said yes, come on over. So there was nobody else from any university anywhere on this planet who had a sort of degree. I've got a postgraduate degree in computer programming. A weird thing when it was so natural at the time. So I went to Vancouver and started setting up their computing department. I was teaching something called numerical analysis, which is that department of mathematics that you need to know about to write programs. And so I got on pretty well at the University of British Columbia, but it didn't seem to have much future. It was really not accepted. It existed, but was not accepted generally by the academic staff there. But a couple of Americans came up from a place called Seattle, and they were looking. They had to set up a computer conference. I'm going into detail here, but
please do.
Cut it all out. They were setting up a computer conference, and they heard that there was this weird Englishman living up. See, Seattle and Vancouver are very close together. You hardly know one from the other. So they came up on the train to Vancouver and came over and saw us. And they said to me, could you give a talk about British versus American, or American versus British computers? And I said, sure. I didn't know anything about either, because I didn't know there were any English computers other than the one we had at Cambridge. And so they said, well, you come down to Seattle. This answers your question. I came down to Seattle because I was invited down there to give a talk. And it was a 3-day computer conference, and I'd never been to a computer conference before, anywhere, of course. And so they said, right, you're going on last. At 3 days, we're going to let other people speak for 3 days, insurance companies and engineering companies, manufacturing companies and so forth. But your talk is so different from all the others that we're going to put you on all by yourself right at the very end. And so have yourself ready for that. And I didn't really I didn't realise that they were giving me the whatever it's called. And so I sat through this for three full days, and right at the end, people were nodding off. There was a famous author of a mathematics textbook. He slept right through the entire thing, and I felt so sorry for him because it was a really boring show, the whole thing. And I thought, somehow I'm going on last, and I'll be the only one that anyone remembers, so it better be good. And I'd never made a speech before. It was my first speech ever. It was the first of many, but I didn't know that then. And so I made this speech, and I took 2 computers, and their, if I may say, floating point add time. The British one, which is the one we had at Cambridge, was a few microseconds faster to add 2 numbers together than the fastest American one, which was called the IBM 704 at the time. The British one was the EDSAC, which now is they've made a reconstituted EDSAC, and people can see it at the Science Museum. So I'm told. I haven't been over there to see it. But anyway, so I started talking about these 2 things, and I didn't realise that if you make a good speech, people laugh. They don't laugh. I don't know why they do, but they laugh because it's different to all the others speakers who've already been on that day. And I thought, right, this is great. So I just for 35 minutes just made a lot of jokes. I had everyone laughing. I what the hell is this? None of this is funny, but they thought it was. And right at the end, a couple of chaps came charging through this man. A couple of hundred people there altogether. Came charging through and grabbed me physically and said, "Hey, would you like to come and work with us?" I said, "Well, who are you?" And they said, "Boeing. We build aeroplanes." Oh, I heard about Boeing. And they said, "And we've got a computer. In fact, we have 2 computers." Two computers. I said, "You got 2 computers?" And if you go over to England, there are none to speak of, unless the one, except for the one I'm talking about. And I said, "I know nothing about aeroplanes. I don't know what wings do. I understand that wings make aeroplanes fly, and so you definitely need wings if you're going to make aeroplanes. But how they do it, I've no idea. So I don't know what the mathematics of wings look like. But if you can explain that, I could work with you on it, on whatever your problems are." And they said, "Okay, when would you like to join us?" "You can join us tomorrow if you like." So I said, "Well, I've already got a one-off job about scheduling the oil flow from Edmonton, Alberta, which is another part of Canada. It's joined to British Columbia, all the way down the middle, and I've got to go over there, but it shouldn't take me long to program their scheduling department, and so when that's finished, I can come to Seattle. I don't know how you get there or where you stay, what you do when you get there, but and I know nothing about airplanes. But if you can explain to me about airplanes, I can probably add a few computer programs to what you're doing. That's how I got to Seattle.
Okay.
So I went up to Edmonton, Alberta, and fixed scheduling, and came down and was working at Boeing. So I was working and I lived many, many years in Seattle.
So when you arrived at Boeing, they were proudly telling you about their 2 computers. What was the first thing? What was the first job? What was your first task?
Yes, that's a good question. My first job was to have a really good look at the wing. They said, well, they didn't use X, Y, Z components of points in space. They had X was called the wing buttock line. The Y was called the something station. I can't remember. It was such a long time ago. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, they told me what their version of the XYZ coordinates of a point are, and they said, "Look, we've got these basic drawings. They were hand." I have to tell you, I have to break in. Yes, on my very, very, very first day at Boeing, it was one Monday morning. And they took all Boeing used to take all new employees on their first day round on a show and tell walkie-walkie, and so that we can show you really quickly in one day what we do and how we do it. And so I went in with the other first day people, and we went through some and some of these people I went around, they were already they knew about the airframe construction business somewhere or other. I don't know, there were several small ones. So these people wanted to get into Boeing, which was really the best company in the world to be working for. Could be today too. Is a marvelous place. But anyway, we came into a room which was there was no window. There was a door, no windows, no furniture, and nothing, and a flat, hard floor. It was probably made of concrete or something, and an engineer, an enormous bloke. How tall he was, I've no idea, but because he's lying on the floor. He was lying on a sheet of paper on the floor, holding in his hand a pencil, and he had a little ruler. And this he's lying on an enormous sheet of paper, making marks, making points in space, in 3-dimensional space, but on a 2-dimensional sheet of paper, an enormous sheet of paper. He didn't say a word. The guide on this walkie-walkies took us in there and said, well, this is an engineer. I didn't know his name. Didn't matter. And he was probably 7 feet tall or something like that. He was a big bloke just lying there making points on bits of paper. And I thought, that's not going to last long. We're going to replace that way of working. I even had the idea then, didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew, I felt it. This is my instinct about. I've been led by instinct with computers all the years, and it started really off with this bloke lying on the floor, and after about 10 minutes of looking at him, he didn't say a word to anybody. He's quite used to it on Monday mornings. And no one said anything to him, but my brain suddenly got set alight with thought of how somehow I could do his job more accurately, faster, cheaper with a computer than it was doing with him and his fellow engineers. And I'm sure he and I talked about it, he would have agreed. I'd had to explain to him then what a computer was and so forth. I'm giving you a long version of how I got to Seattle, I think. And so don't know, this is my first job. And so I showed up for work the next day, and they said, we want you to do figuratively, get inside the wing. We want you to get inside the wing and make sure that all the points, the XYZ components, as I said earlier 5 minutes ago, they don't call it XYZ. You wouldn't have known what I was talking about. This wing buttock line and the wing station, and yes. Anyway, we want you to. Your job will be to make sure that all the geometry of a wing is as accurate as it could possibly be made, and that's how I learnt what aeroplanes were and how they flew and so forth. And it's not least the leading edge. The leading edge of an aeroplane has to be absolutely on. And everything on my day one in Boeing, everything was made on all the points of the space that an aeroplane took up were represented on two-dimensional sheets of paper by a shaky hand input. By shaky hand means any hand at all, because all hands shake, they all vibrate, and the points that they make, although not exactly the points that the aerodynamicist or the aeronautical engineer would have decreed, put it that way, they were close enough, and it was close enough to win the war. And working at Boeing, because I knew all about Boeing airplanes, because I was a wartime kid. I was about, I don't know, when it finished, 15, something like that. So I knew what the bombers looked like. I made models of bombers, but models you make at home are even less accurate than
a shaky hand of a giant man laying on the floor.
You've got it there. You've got it there. Yes. I'm getting a bit more verbose. I haven't discussed these things with anybody for, I don't know, 65 years or something like that.
The aspect of it I'm really interested in is that you walked in symbolising new technology.
Yes.
And there was the gentleman laying prostrate on the floor.
He was.
With shaky hands and pencils.
Right.
And at some point, I'm guessing either his bosses or you said to him, your days of laying on the floor are over, we're going to use a computer for this. And what I'm really interested in is what kind of reaction you got. I'm trying to tie it into how we feel these days about artificial intelligence.
Okay. That's a really good question. That's a brilliant question. No one's ever asked me that question before, but I can tell you the answer, and it's very visible.
A visible reaction? A
visible reaction,
well, he was
yes.
Very big, so there's plenty of person to give a reaction
there. That's right. No, I didn't go around making a fool of myself, telling him what the future held. I thought the best thing to do about the future is bring it on.
Ah, right.
Not tell you about it, but bring it on. And I didn't know how I was going to do that yet, because to me, in those days, a computer consisted of a mainframe. A mainframe is a bloody great metal box. Well, your listeners can't see the size of this room, but a metal box would take up the whole of this room. And now it would be a tiny, about the size of a fly's kneecap, element in a PC. But in those days, that was it. So as time went on, and as all the evolution of computers, of computing, all the evolution of computing took place in companies that were building mainframe computers, and the leading one of those in terms of not the reverence we had of them, but of the money they were making was IBM, and then there was another one called Univac, and there were several others. There was Burroughs, there was Royal RCA. There were half a dozen American companies, and there was one in Britain called Leo. It was an amazing company because it wasn't a technical company. It was Joe Lyons' Corner Shop. Now, most of your listeners won't have heard of Joe Lyons, but everybody knew about it back in the 50s, right up into the 50s. It was in the first half of this century. Joe Lyons was famous for being the place you went to get a cup of tea and a cake in the middle of the morning, in the middle of the afternoon, and they started by copying the Cambridge computer. They called it Leo, and that was Britain's first attempt at having a commercial company to not design, because design was made by Cambridge, but construction and paying, because they had money. We didn't. They paid Cambridge University money and bought the design of the thing we called the EDSAC, and made a computer which they called Leo 1, Leo.
I want to make sure I'm understanding this, because this seems quite wild to me. You're saying there was a chain of tea shops?
Tea shops?
Tea shops, is that what you're saying, with the tea and the cake?
Yeah, all over Britain.
And they were one of the founding fathers of British computing?
They certainly were.
I've never
And there
heard
wasn't
that.
a single technical person working for Joe Lyons.
So that's somebody at Joe Lyons saying, I think I see the future, and that must have seemed like quite a gamble.
I could get his name because I got it. I've got background books on all this stuff that I picked up years later, so I can actually produce a name. So there is a name. I'm terribly sorry to him and his grandchildren that I can't remember his name. Cambridge needed money. Universities always need money. If you chuck money at them, they'll do marvellous things. And so this first marvellous, in my life, the first marvellous thing was building this EDSAC computer. And around here somewhere I've got a book with and the front cover is the EDSAC computer. It's my life with computers.
What a great guest. We ought to get a plug in there, because one of your several books. I'll include links in the. We include little notes each time we publish one of these, and I'll include some links to your books in there.
Okay, what I could do is bring you a little pile of books. I know where they are, and we can do that at some stage.
Then I'd be interested. I'd be interested to share that list with everyone who's listening as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, shall I go? I know where they are. I could pick them up right now if you like.
Let's do it in a little while. I'm quite enjoying the
but I'm in the middle of a story, believe it or not.
Exactly.
I'm in the middle of a story. And the story is that the evolution of computing was all about the evolution of computers. Computers being a large metal box.
So led by the hardware very much.
That's right. It's all made, but I wrote an article. I won't name it, but I wrote an article which got published, along with a lot of other stuff, about things to hang on to computers. And let's see, I can't remember the year now, but the thing that one of these devices was a plotter, an ordinary plotter, and there were two companies in America, and I don't suppose there were any in Britain, that actually made plotters, and their customers were mostly sort of weather people.
So, sorry to interrupt you, Norman. Just a plotter, is that, in my mind, that's kind of an automated drawing tool, so a large
exactly
flat
yes
okay,
yes
okay,
yeah. The distance between your hands was exactly it. Is about a foot and a half by a foot and a half, with a sorry, this isn't in pictorially, but it moved a pen on paper. So there were you wrote your program. Okay, let me take a step back. Here's a story. I've just recalled it. We were running out of printers. The American computer manufacturers felt that they must have larger and faster printers because people were doing more and more computing, mostly over in the United States, much more than in Britain, I have to say, and it has to be printed. And so I was constantly having to go to the headquarters of Boeing, which is different part of Seattle, and there's a lot of rivalry between different organizations, as there always are in a large organization. And one of these was between me and the financial people, and I had to all the time explain what computers were and why we needed them and why they cost so much money and all that sort of thing. And and when you looked at the heaps of paper that were printed every day, your mind boggled. What on earth do they do with all these printed numbers? They were printing thousands and thousands of numbers in places where 5 years earlier there had been none whatsoever. So I had a chap called Art Dietrich. I hope he's still alive and hears this somehow. He's a Swiss, lives in Seattle. And when any new idea came up, put it onto old Art. He'll find out what to do about it and so forth. So I said to Arthur, go around and ask the engineers what they do with these thousands or millions of data points printed out on sheets of paper. It's how you could find a number in hidden. Yeah, the best place to hide a tree is in a forest, and the best place to hide a number is on a printout. That was my feeling at the time.
Nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed. No. And he came back in a couple of weeks and said, well, I tell you, Norman, what they do, they plot these. They go through the numbers and they plot them. And I said, well, why don't we have the computer plot them? Well, there are no plotters attached to computers. I said, well, let's do it. So we found a couple of plotter makers, one on the top right-hand corner of America and one in the bottom left-hand corner, and went over and had a chat with them and so forth, and we chose one, and electromechanics or something over Long Branch, New Jersey, the top right-hand corner of America, and they told me how the plotter worked. So I sat down and wrote a program that went so it could go automatically from a calculation program on the computer to a plotter program, and I gave it the very clever title, this program, Plot 1. So the first plotting plotting program that was ever made on this planet was one I made some Friday morning, or Saturday morning, I suppose it was, for the plotter at Boeing. And so we bought the program, and the plotter maker, they bought the program. No, he didn't buy the program. I wrote the program. The plotter maker, they bought that program from us so that they could sell computer generated plotting to hopefully to customers, and they got lots. So I set up a little table, a little cupboard, I suppose it was, a small office. Put the plotter in the office. I hired a chap off the streets of Seattle. I can't remember his name or why him, but anyway, I needed someone to change the sheets of paper. And his role was to first thing in the morning put a sheet of paper on the glass top of this plotter, and press a certain button, stand back, and this plotter used to plot. And after a few weeks, the reputation of computing took an enormous leap, because there in computing we were doing something that had never been done before. We got the computer actually to plot the results of something, and it was fast, and it was accurate, and all the rest of it. And after a couple of days of this, I walked into the office to see how things were going, and there were half a dozen senior engineering managers, and these are guys who during the war had been working day after day, night after night, working, drawing lines on with shaky hands and so forth, and measuring them and so forth, and building bombers to bomb Germany. And they were amazed. They were just standing there. No one was saying anything. They were just watching a machine do what they had spent a career doing, except that it was doing it fast. Sorry?
What they'd spent a career doing, laying on the floor.
Laying on
shaky
the floor.
pencils.
That's right. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Of course, a lot of them must have done. If they were 7 feet tall, that's what they were doing. And that's a good point to make. But I sort of walked through, and I didn't even say good afternoon, gentlemen. I just walked through and stood there watching, not knowing what to say. Afterwards, I realised what to say, to just reinforce what they were looking at. And they were looking at automatic plotting. And it's when you see it the first time, because everyone sees it today, but when you see it the first time, it's an incredible experience to see, and then you could make you could make, and I had the idea of making a Mickey Mouse. If you programmed a cartoon, a Mickey Mouse, put that in, it would come out plotted. And I had the idea of customers. It couldn't be our customers because we couldn't go into business with Walt Disney, but the plotter makers could, and I guess they did. I don't know what's happened, but there was an enormous breakthrough with computing. Firstly, it meant that we didn't have to do all that printing. And finally, at last, I discovered something that was easy to explain to them, because half my life in those early days was explaining to the people with the company's money what computers were doing for them. And you didn't have to use the word computer; you could just say automatic plotter or something, and they knew what you were talking about. And this is something it just happened. I didn't predict.
So were you as surprised as anybody else at how much that changed Boeing? I mean, how long did it take for the change to really
It
sort of
changed
bed in?
overnight.
Overnight.
Yeah, because Boeing, like Ford, motor car company, right, they spend an enormous amount of time that people aren't aware of, I suppose, in their design office.
With shaky pencils.
And with shaky pencils. And then my next step was, okay, if we can draw it, we can cut it. We need an automatic cutting machine, and that we got.
So nowadays that'd be called CNC, or
I call it CAD, computer aided design.
Oh, okay.
And
so
CAM,
yeah,
computer aided manufacturing. I wrote it all up years and years ago, but I didn't call it computer aided design. I called it design automation.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere in this house there's a bent copy of this paper.
It's the automation. I keep remembering that this is meant to be a sort of a computer and science based podcast. I've just been listening to your story, but the automation aspect of it I find really interesting. Was there sort of a kickback from anyone? Did you? What I'm trying to place this with in my mind, and I apologise if I'm miles off, is the Luddites with the mills. You know, when the mills started to automate processes, there was a fairly significant kickback against that from people who didn't like the march of progress. Did you experience that at Boeing?
No, we didn't have Luddites at Boeing. We didn't have Luddites.
So everyone was on board.
Everyone was on board. Once they saw this, there was nothing to say. We'd buy a dozen of them right away, like, and that it was an unacknowledged revolution, I suppose.
Unacknowledged revolution. So I've been. You might have seen me picking my phone up. I'm making notes as we go along. I'm just going to write down unacknowledged revolution.
Yes, I'd never thought of it before. I'm thinking about these things now in the safety and comfort of my music room.
Brilliant. I'm going to wrap this up about here. No doubt we'll speak again. I'm trying to type and speak at the same time, and that's a struggle. So to summarise, you went into Boeing, or you went to Canada and America in search of computers, and ended up, I dare say, being one of the first people to connect a computer to a printer. I'm going to call it a printer. I know it was a plotter, but
no, but you don't call a plotter a printer.
See, now I'm being not a Luddite, but
no. But I mean, printers became enormous things, and to see thousands of numbers being printed per minute or per second on a printer in those days, I suppose there's very little printing going on. It's the computer controlling movements of things in hospitals.
Yeah, I think printers now, I guess, are the final output.
Yes.
Rather than when you're talking about computers, if I understand it correctly, they were a part of the calculation.
That's right.
Yeah, so
yes.
I think that's the big change.
I hadn't thought of it that way before, but that's the case.
Well, I've got to be honest. The conversation that I was expecting to have, although Norman, for the listeners, Norman and I have known each other a little while, a few years, and I can never quite predict which direction a conversation with you will go. And I was expecting this to be a conversation about people who might resist technology being overcome in the end. But what was quite brilliant about this story is that when people saw the technology, there was no battle. There was
no discussion. They just stood there. These are guys who are always talking and shouting, and building aeroplanes, it's a highly verbal thing. They scream and shout and swear. I mean, I'd done my national service. I knew how to swear, but it didn't come as a surprise to me when I found myself, back amongst my erstwhile swearers. But what was I saying? I can't remember.
So it was just accepted.
Yes, it got accepted. Just because once if it's all happening inside an enormous box, and all it's doing is printing lines and lines and lines and lines of paper, well, what the hell? But once it started emulating them, moving a pen around, drawing things, it suddenly came over, and they saw it, and they didn't discuss it. It was.
So what happened to those people? Because obviously their days of laying on the floor with pencils is over.
That's right.
But surely I assume they didn't all just become, no longer. I assume they didn't just wander out of the front door of Boeing that day and go off and become, find other paths, other jobs. Did they? What happened to those people after they? Not so much saw the writing on the wall, but saw the pen on the plotter.
Yeah, well, that's right. They were engineers, of course. These guys were engineers. I think we're being visited, but that doesn't matter. He comes in every day to pick up the newspaper.
Okay.
They are engineers, and the goal of an engineer, in the case of Boeing, was to get an aeroplane up.
Morning.
Hi, Derek. We're having a discussion here.
Okay, I'll keep out of it.
Yeah, I put the papers out for you.
You have, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
You see that Chelsea lost?
Did they? What was the score?
Well, that was 2-1, but what was wrong was they just paid $5 million for a new player to boost their confidence, and he was sent off.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll talk about it tomorrow, Derek.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, bye.
I'll just have a look at your today's paper.
You just wander around the house and look at anything you like. Yes. Yes.
So these people, engineers.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if when they saw not so much the writing on the wall, but the pen on the plotter, whether they thought, great, we can now elevate our work onto more thoughtful things, because some of the manual.
That's a good way to put it. Yes.
I'm just guessing.
Because the ultimate object was early on, just before the war, was a Spitfire flying, and then it became a B-17 flying, and so forth. And how they got there is kind of lost in the actually seeing the thing in operation. It must have felt the same in the 19th century with locomotives and all the rest of it, because they had the same problems and they had no computers. So the object of the exercise was to get the plane flying, in the case of Boeing, and there wasn't much discussion by that time with the computer and so forth. There wasn't much discussion about how it happened, because that was all. It went overnight from being a crazy idea to being, this is how we do it, and so these engineers were because the quality. I hadn't thought about this, but because the quality of the work got such an enormous improvement, the accuracy of the lines and the speed of the lines. Yes, on the 727, I'll show you a picture of the 727 in the book. It's an airplane with 3 engines at the back. You've probably never seen one because they didn't make many of them, but that was the breakthrough. And so the team that we had in designing, in writing thinking of the mathematics, writing the programming and so forth, for drawing and cutting and assembling the 727. That was the leading thing. That was the first thing ever made by a computer. and it was made right outside my room, and it was an incredible feeling at the time, and it still is. And but if people haven't gone through it, they probably don't realise what it meant. It meant a lot. So yes, so these engineers, as the equipment came along, the engineers who they couldn't program. We don't want them to program. Don't bug about. Well, we know how to. You just tell us. Just speak it. Just speak it, and I'll design it, and then the machine will make it. You know. That's. And I think that taking a step backwards here. When we were children at school, we learnt about the Industrial Revolution. And of course, the computer was I call it I call it a digital revolution or something like that. But it was certainly an industrial and social revolution, and has been just absorbed by people. You know, computers are here to stay. Plotters are here to stay, even though that no one outside of a factory actually sees a plotter working. The people that really count here, they know exactly what it does, and if something goes wrong with the machine, they give you holy hell. And if they don't get the money to buy some crazy idea that is going to work like a previous crazy ideas worked, you know, you're getting an earful of horrible English.
That's brilliant. Okay, Norman, it's been absolutely fascinating speaking to you. I really appreciate your time, and yeah, so I'll include some links to your book in the show notes for this, and just thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, great pleasure. We need more people like you to ask us questions, and then turn the answers into sayable things.
If I can do that, then I will consider my life well spent.
That's right. You do that and get a good career and write about them and all the rest of it.
Thank you very much.